Well, it's nice to see you back in the chair, Presiding Officer. Well, we've had a good debate, and the frustrating thing about this debate is we actually all seem to be agreeing with one another. And I know that can happen in a Scottish Parliament debate, but everyone's expressing frustration about what is not happening and what should happen. And so I want to thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing forward this debate and the previous debate, and just say I think it's a terrible shame that the government can't use the hours of their debating time for these subjects to be properly addressed in a full-scale debate. And I think they run away from these issues. And I've got to say from the off that while Alex Cole-Hamilton gave a brilliant summary of what the problems are, I felt Marie Todd, the Minister's contribution, was too self-congratulatory. There was not enough self-awareness or realisation that they are the government and have been sitting where they sit for 18 years, and we are still talking about a problem that is worsening and not improving. When Sandesh Gulhani talked about there being a postcode lottery, he combined that stated fact with anecdotal evidence of his own experience as a GP in dealing with some of the emotional issues that arise in his surgery as families express their frustration for the lack of care they are giving. And I come back to this point that Paul Sweeney made so well in a simple phrase. Ministers, he said, are washing their hands of the issue. And all too often in this chamber, Scottish ministers are repeating the same action of washing their hands of an issue for which they have full accountability to this House, to this chamber, but also to the people of Scotland. And Willie Rennie gave an excellent speech talking about the cost, the human cost of the lack of action we see in this area, and specifically highlighting the economic cost. The statistic he shared about economic inactivity among 16 to 64-year-olds ought to make us all stop and think very deeply about what our priorities are in this Parliament and what the Scottish Government's priorities ought to be to get this country working. And when he told the story about his visit to the ADH support group in St Andrews, he used the term in relation to the young man whose story he shared of it being a crying shame. I would go stronger. I think it's a scandal. It's a scandal that we live in one of the richest countries in the world, and we can't give this sort of support to people who need help. That is beyond a crying shame. I think it is a scandal. And I think that it's very hard to disagree with Elena Whittam. She said, and I hope I'm not misquoting her, and I'm sure she'll correct me if I am, that we cannot shy away from the fact that too many people are being let down. People, she said, should not have to raise petitions to get the health care they need. I think that says it all. And if this debate has done anything, it should serve to call us to action, not just to share words and sentiments and sympathies, but to actually see something is done to change this situation. And Annie Wells talked about... I absolutely will.
Christine Graham.
Thank you. It's very kind of you. Do you in any way accept anything in my submission which was not to park medication or assessments, but to look at interventions, alternatives early on through the educational process at the very start at nursery?
Always through the chair.
Of course, I agree with Christine Graham on that subject. Of course I do. All practical means should be used to alleviate the suffering and confusion that people feel when they have these conditions, that they don't know what they are. Their own self-awareness is challenged. And it's right what Christine Graham said. But she also said, in concluding her remarks, I think, that this was not an attempt on her part to sidestep the importance of diagnosis. And it's on diagnosis, if I might conclude, because there are many other things. And by the way, Claire Baker was absolutely right, Presiding Officer. The playing about with the waiting lists, the changing of definitions, the moving of blocks of people to different lists, it's a disgrace. And this government has engaged in that and has done for years in order to get the answer that they want from statistics. That's not acceptable. And so I conclude on diagnosis to simply say this, that the Minister failed to acknowledge that for adults in particular, the inability to obtain a diagnosis disqualified them from some of the support they need, particularly, as Willie Rennie said, in relation to employment. It is not a luxury to get a diagnosis. It's not an added extra. It is the key that often unlocks the support that people need, particularly when it comes to their employment, a point, as I say, that Willie Rennie made. And I realise I'm out of time, but I want to thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing this subject to the floor of the Chamber. I hope the Minister, I hope the Cabinet Secretary will meet with the Parliamentary Minister and ask for a proper debate in proper debating time so we can properly air this issue and come together as a Parliament to see that something changes for people who ought not have any further delay in their diagnosis and treatment.